Pinerest Meadows is a planned community outside Charlotte, North Carolina, built in the mid-2000s and comprising roughly 140 homes. Homeowners pay mandatory dues of $85 per month to support common area lawn care, a little-used pool, and a modest clubhouse. For years, association governance functioned quietly. A retired accountant served as board president, routinely approving ordinary matters, and eventually moved to Florida in 2023. Resident participation stayed low, and election turnout reflected that reality. The structures, covenants, dues, and amenities were familiar. The style of enforcement was not yet the center of community life. Within this structure, Garrett arrived as an owner with straightforward goals. He served 12 years in the Marine Corps, completed 2 deployments, and concluded service after a back injury. With a modest pension and a plan to use a VA loan prudently, he purchased a 3-bedroom ranch in Pinerest Meadows in 2019. Renovation became routine and intentionally hands-on. Weekends at home improvement stores, online tutorials, and incremental upgrades that replaced builder leftovers with sturdier work. During this period, there were no reported neighbor complaints, no disputes over neglect, and no suggestion of conflict. The work was methodical and the house improved. Observation soon met opportunity. Inside the same subdivision, foreclosures, estate sales, and other distressed properties were available at discounts. Over 4 years, Garrett added 6 additional homes. He acquired quietly, held through Summit Holdings NC, an LLC chosen to keep ownership unobtrusive, and maintained a low profile. The rentals were well kept and tenants paid on time. The people renting included a teacher, a nurse, a retired couple, and a young family. Exteriors stayed clean and operations remained orderly. By outward measures, investment and maintenance aligned with community expectations. On paper, the governing framework remained constant. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions applied to every lot. Enforcement authority rested with the HOA, and dues supported amenities residents could point to on a map. Even if the pool saw little use and the clubhouse often smelled like old coffee. Process, however, depends on participation. When the longtime president departed and the vice president declined to step in, only one candidate emerged. In a board election drawing 19 votes, roughly 12% turnout, Brenda Kowich campaigned on restoring neighborhood pride and maintaining property values. She won, and a leadership transition followed inside a culture that had been quiet for years. Residents then observed a shift. A historically low visibility board now signaled a renewed emphasis on standards. Clipboards, notes, and reminders appeared. With treasurer and secretary roles vacant, more day-to-day decisions flowed through the president. The rules themselves did not change. Attention and interpretation did. In a place accustomed to rubber-stamped continuity, visible enforcement took on new weight. The consequences would be felt less in documents than in ordinary exchanges between owners and the association. Against this backdrop, the earliest points of friction were concrete. On a hot July afternoon, Garrett replaced a rotted mailbox post while heat shimmered above the asphalt. Brenda introduced herself as the new HOA president, referenced community standards such as lawn height and trash can visibility, and asked whether his F-150 qualified as a commercial vehicle. The question previewed a definitional debate, how the written covenants would be read and how discretion would be exercised in daily enforcement. Up to that moment, governance had been background noise. Afterward, it was a presence at the curb, at the driveway, and at the edge of the mailbox. Following the quiet election that placed Brenda Kowich in charge, the rhythm of association business changed almost overnight. At what residents assumed would be a routine board session, the folding tables in the clubhouse displayed only one nameplate. The treasurer and secretary positions were vacant. Brenda opened the meeting with a short statement. "Until replacements are found, I'll be handling all board functions personally." The gavel tapped once, and what had been a 5-member body effectively became one. For Garrett, expecting the familiar process of motion, second, and recorded vote. The scene felt compressed, authority funneled through a single chair. Minutes reflected that Brenda approved invoices, correspondence, and violations in her own handwriting. Fewer internal checks meant that discretionary authority widened. Nothing illegal on its face, yet everything relied on trust. The first formal conflict surfaced in early spring. A letter marked violation notice, CC&Rs prior 4.7b, arrived in Garrett's mailbox. It cited commercial vehicle parked in residential driveway. He read the section carefully. The covenant prohibited vehicles over 1 ton or displaying business signage. His Ford F-150 was 3/4 of a ton, unmarked, used for household errands. He photographed the truck from all sides, attached the images to an email, and quoted the covenant's wording verbatim. The message ended politely. "Please confirm this meets the standard as written." The reply came the next afternoon, brief, formal, and final. "The board has reviewed your appeal. The violation stands. The association retains discretionary authority." There was no explanation beyond that phrase. Garrett noted it carefully. Across the street, neighbor Craig Dietrich, a visible supporter of Brenda's campaign, parked a Silverado 1500 of the same class without receiving any notice. Garrett documented the comparison but made no accusation. The absence of parity was simply recorded for later reference. Weeks turned patterned. Notices arrived almost rhythmically. One for grass height. His measurement showed 2.7 inches against the 3-inch limit. Another for leaving trash cans visible past pickup day. Then a claim of unapproved door color, although the shade matched original builder beige. A noise disturbance attributed to wind chimes. Even a citation for a garden gnome measuring 11.5 inches where 12 were allowed. Each carried a potential $50 per day fine. By October, accumulated penalties totaled $850. The envelope cadence felt mechanical. Same paper stock, same tone, same timeline. Garrett contacted attorney Consuela Verne, a solo practitioner known locally for HOA disputes. Her hourly rate was $250. She reviewed the file, sent a cease and desist letter alleging selective enforcement and procedural abuse, and cited due process provisions within the governing documents. The HOA's downtown firm replied in curt legal language. "Claims are meritless. Continued frivolous correspondence will prompt appropriate action." The letters established opposing positions: homeowner alleging inequity, association asserting absolute discretion. Under counsel's guidance, Garrett faced a decision. Many owners simply paid fines or repainted trim to restore peace. Instead, he chose the slower statutory route, requesting transparency rather than capitulation. North Carolina's Planned Community Act allowed record inspection upon written demand. Preparing to invoke that statute, he organized his correspondence chronologically, labeled envelopes, and photographed postings still taped to his door. By late fall, the tone of neighborhood life had shifted. Conversations once about weather now included references to violations and authority. The same folding table in the clubhouse remained occupied by one person wielding the gavel. Garrett's path had moved from compliance questions to governance questions. How an association designed for collective oversight could function with a single active officer. The episode of the F-150 became the hinge point. What began as a driveway disagreement now represented the first test of process itself. With legal counsel retained and a plan forming to examine records, Garrett's dispute evolved from arguing over inches of grass to asking who, exactly, was measuring, and by what right. The next chapter would take that inquiry from notices to statutes, from fine ledgers to the paper backbone of the association's own records. By the end of October, Garrett's focus had shifted from arguing over fines to understanding process. North Carolina's Planned Community Act, Section 47F3118, outlined an owner's right to review association records. On a cool Monday morning, He prepared a certified letter requesting 3 years of HOA minutes, financial statements, contracts, and violation logs. The envelope went out before noon. He marked the date in his notebook, knowing the statute allowed 10 days for acknowledgement. 9 days later, an email arrived from the association. It stated that financial documents were undergoing audit and would be unavailable for 60 to 90 days, with other materials to follow once the audit completed. Technically, the reply met the letter of the law. Practically, it postponed transparency. Garrett logged the exchange and moved on to community channels. That weekend, he opened the Pinerest Meadows Facebook group and posted a single question. Anyone else getting violation notices lately? Within 3 hours, 47 comments appeared. Iris, a longtime resident known for her pollinator garden, wrote that she had received a citation labeling native coneflowers as weeds, despite 15 years of approval. The Nguyen family reported a notice demanding removal of their portable basketball hoop, used only on weekends. Other homeowners added smaller grievances: trash cans a few inches visible, mailbox paint not sufficiently glossy, holiday lights past permitted date. Patterns emerged. Residents in Brenda's social circle, those often at her backyard gatherings, reported none. Others, mostly long-timers or quiet renters, described a wave of enforcement unseen before. Garrett printed screenshots and organized them by date. Privately, Iris messaged him. Brenda had mentioned a buyer for her house and hinted that it might be best to make a clean sale before more violations stack up. Iris said her hands shook when she opened each pink envelope. Garrett listened, recorded her statement with consent, and realized the dispute was widening from personal frustration to collective anxiety. Consuela Verne, his attorney, reviewed the audit delay. She considered it suspiciously convenient. A follow-up letter went out asserting that deferral beyond the 10-day window violated the spirit of disclosure requirements. The tone remained measured. Please confirm the exact audit timeline and custodian of records. 6 days later, a package arrived. Inside were partial minutes, expense ledgers, and photocopied bank statements. The sudden availability suggested that the supposed audit had resolved as soon as counsel pressed. Garrett refrained from conclusions, but the timing was notable. Around kitchen tables, residents compared notes. Dell, a retired electrician, brought printed copies of invoices showing unusual landscaping totals. The group began meeting weekly. They were not activists, just neighbors verifying what their dues funded. Discussion evolved from why the fines to who approves spending. By Thanksgiving, awareness replaced apathy. A community once detached from its governance had started reading statutes and highlighting numbers. The dispute that began with a single violation now occupied living rooms across Pinerest Meadows. Garrett's plan grew methodical. Maintain documentation, respect procedure, avoid speculation. The next confrontation would not be emotional, it would be evidentiary. The final week of November began uneventfully until Tuesday morning brought a knock at Garrett's door. When he opened it, Brenda Coach stood flanked by 2 men in dark security uniforms. One held a clipboard, the other recorded with a body camera. Brenda extended a pink sheet bearing an embossed style seal. "You have 72 hours to vacate," she announced. The document cited unpaid fines totaling $1,200 and referenced North Carolina, per 47F 3-166. Garrett glanced once and immediately recognized the inconsistency. That statute governs liens, not eviction authority. He accepted the paper, thanked her calmly, and watched as she added, "This neighborhood has standards, loud enough for nearby porches to hear." The guards followed her down the driveway. He set the paper on his kitchen counter, photographed every page, and forwarded the images to Consuela Verne. Within minutes, she called. "That's not a lawful instrument," she said. "It mimics county formatting but holds no jurisdiction. Serving it constitutes misrepresentation." Rather than confront Brenda directly, Garrett opted for transparency. He uploaded the photo to the neighborhood Facebook group with a neutral caption. "Has anyone else received this notice?" Responses cascaded. Within hours, 12 families confirmed receiving threatening letters or verbal warnings. Some described escalating fines. Others recounted pressure to sell. Patterns overlapped with earlier observations. Targets largely outside Brenda's circle. Dell messaged privately, "Something's wrong with the money. We used to have reserve funds. Now the board says we're broke." Garrett turned to the partial financial records he'd received. Simple math revealed discrepancies. With 140 homes paying $85 monthly, annual dues should approach $140,000. Reported landscaping costs consumed nearly 60% of that. He called the vendor listed on invoices, Greene County Lawn Care. The owner, surprised, said their contract was $31,000 per year since 2020. That left more than $50,000 unaccounted for. Garrett cross-checked bank images. Payments marked landscaping were written not to Greene County Lawn Care, but to Pinerest Property Solutions. I'll see. A quick state registry search showed its registered agent, Kenneth Kowich, Brenda's brother. The finding shifted the narrative from enforcement overreach to possible self-dealing. Garrett compiled a binder, images of checks, vendor comparisons, statutory references. Consuela prepared correspondence noting potential fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Meanwhile, social media filled with speculation. Some residents defended Brenda as trying to clean things up. Others cited Garrett's documentation. The neighborhood that once ignored HOA business was now reading corporate registry filings. 2 days later, a pale sunset fell over Pinerest Meadows as Garrett stood at his mailbox. Pink notice pinned inside a clear sleeve for reference. Cars slowed to glance. The symbol of arbitrary power had become evidence in plain sight. The incident marked a line crossed, from administrative nuisance to intimidation. And yet, it also marked a turning point. Owners recognizing that authority demanded proof, not posture. Early December brought another printed notice, this time from the HOA itself. Emergency meeting next week. The agenda listed a 40% dues increase to cover legal expenses defending against frivolous challenges. Residents noted the minimum 48-hour notice barely satisfied legal requirements. Almost simultaneously, mailboxes filled with glossy flyers. Across the top, "Protect our community values." Below, a photograph of Garrett's F-150 angled unflatteringly beside a caption reading, "Commercial eyesore. Is this what we want next door?" The text avoided direct defamation but implied blame. Outside investors, property value decline, unnecessary drama. The neighborhood divided quietly. Some ignored the material. Others repeated its language about outsiders. But those already hit by repeated violations saw coordination. An email chain titled, "Know the Truth," began among 15 households. Screenshots of discrepancies circulated, financial summaries, check images, selective enforcement examples. Garrett remained mostly silent publicly, focusing on data integrity. At his kitchen table one Thursday night, Dell, Iris, and the Nguyen family joined him. They compared spreadsheets while coffee steamed. Garrett then disclosed something few knew. Through his company, Summit Holdings NC, he owned 6 properties in Pinerest Meadows. Under the bylaws' one lot, one vote system, that meant 6 votes. He had already collected 17 signatures on a recall petition. 14 were required. The group considered timing. Iris mentioned discovering that Brenda rented, rather than owned, her residence on Cypress Lane. Garrett checked records and confirmed 349 Cypress Lane belonged to Summit Holdings, leased to Brenda Kowich since May 2023. Rent was 2 months overdue, totaling $3,700. The lease prohibited running a business from the property without written consent. Yet HOA correspondence listed that address as the association office. Consuela advised restraint. Hold any landlord action until after the meeting, she said. Focus on governance, not retaliation. Garrett agreed. A standard pay or quit notice was prepared but left unsent in his folder. As the emergency meeting approached, conversations multiplied. Some residents questioned why dues should rise when services stayed constant. Others feared confrontation. The evening before the meeting, Dell circulated a summary chart contrasting actual vendor payments with expected contract amounts. Numbers rarely provoke emotion, but this time they did. The data suggested more than $50,000 diverted. When the sun set on December 12, chairs were being unfolded in the clubhouse. Attendance would exceed any prior session. What began as whispers about lawns had become an organized challenge to the structure of neighborhood governance itself. By 6 p.m., the clubhouse was standing room only. 48 residents, some holding printed flyers, others carrying notebooks. The air carried the uneasy politeness of a courtroom without a judge. Brenda Kowich opened briskly. Due to rising legal costs from ongoing disputes, dues must increase 40% effective January. She tapped the gavel for emphasis. Garrett raised his hand. Could we review the invoices for those legal costs? Brenda replied. Attorney-client confidentiality prevents disclosure. He nodded once, then set a manila folder on the table. Inside, copies of HOA checks payable to Pinerest Property Solutions, LLC. He spoke evenly. According to our records, landscaping expenses totaled $89,000 over 2 years. Greene County Lawn Care reports billing $31,000 per year. The registered agent for this alternate vendor is Kenneth Kowich, your brother. A collective intake of breath filled the room. Cell phones rose. Recording apps blinked red. Brenda's expression tightened. These accusations are defamatory, she said. You're disrupting community unity, Dell interjected politely. Motion to table the dues increase pending independent audit. Voices murmured assent. Patricia Sloan, the association's longtime secretary emeritus who had retired but attended as observer, called for a voice vote. The chorus of aye overwhelmed the few dissenting sounds. Motion carried. Brenda tried to pivot. This association has been infiltrated by absentee investors exploiting our leniency, she declared. We must consider banning rentals altogether, Garrett responded calmly. For transparency, I own 6 rental properties here, all maintained occupied by working families. Under the bylaws, that equals 6 votes. I'm submitting a recall petition signed by 20 owners above the required threshold. The room fell into a hush. Patricia accepted the petition, noting receipt for the minutes. Brenda gathered her papers and exited before adjournment, trailed by a few supporters. Afterward, residents lingered in small groups, processing what had transpired. For the first time, official power had met documented evidence in open view. The motion for audit passed. The recall process had begun. The meeting closed with Dell's remark echoing through the now quiet clubhouse. Sunlight fixes what silence hides. In the days following the December meeting, momentum replaced hesitation. Garrett, Dell, Iris, and Marcus met weekly in Garrett's dining room, self-dubbed the kitchen cabinet. Attorney Consuela Verne formalized next steps, protect evidence, prepare filings, and ensure the recall complied precisely with bylaws. First came accountability. Consuela filed an ethics complaint with the North Carolina Real Estate Commission concerning the fake eviction notice and possible unauthorized practice of law. She sent Brenda and the HOA's counsel a new cease and desist letter outlining allegations: fraud, embezzlement, and selective enforcement with prejudice. Meanwhile, Dell contacted an acquaintance, Phyllis Chen, a retired IRS auditor. Phyllis volunteered to review the HOA's financials. For 2 weeks she worked quietly, cross-checking line items against bank statements, Her summary found approximately $77,000 misappropriated, 58 through the shell vendor, 12 in personal retail purchases, and 7 in an unbilled legal retainer. Every number came from receipts, not rumor. While that review advanced, Garrett addressed the separate landlord-tenant issue. After the pay-or-quit notice expired without payment, his property manager prepared a summary ejectment filing, but held service until recall logistics settled. Documentation over drama remained the rule. To guarantee fairness, the recall committee appointed Patricia Sloan as independent election monitor. Ballots would be paper, counted by 3 witnesses with quorum verification. Candidates emerged organically: Dell for president, Iris for treasurer, Marcus for secretary. Their platform, transparency, accountability, community, fit on a single flyer printed in black and white at the local library. Brenda's counter-campaign consisted of a photocopied statement accusing outside forces of trying to dismantle tradition. She also hired her nephew, an unlicensed private investigator, to search Garrett's background. The report returned nothing material. Attempting to halt momentum, Brenda called a special board session to amend covenants banning rentals. Consuela immediately objected, citing state law requiring 75% owner approval for such changes. The proposal died in silence. Throughout late December, the neighborhood balanced unease and purpose. Driveways once adorned with pink notices now displayed clipboards collecting signatures. Conversation shifted from rumor to research. Garrett spent evenings scanning each document for digital backup. "If we win," he told Dell, "it has to be because every number adds up." By New Year's Day, ballots were printed, witness volunteers trained, and the election date confirmed, January 15th. Residents who once avoided meetings marked calendars. Pinerest Meadows, a development once defined by quiet compliance, was preparing for its most consequential vote, one that would test whether governance could still belong to the governed. The new year arrived with tension visible even in the small details of neighborhood life. Mailboxes still leaned from winter frost. Christmas lights hung past their welcome. But conversation now circled one subject: the recall vote set for mid-January. Garrett's name surfaced in nearly every exchange, alternately as villain or catalyst depending on who spoke. On January 2nd, he found a fresh gouge running the full length of his truck door, metal scored to primer. No note, no witnesses, only the faint echo of tires on asphalt sometime after midnight. A nearby Ring camera caught a dark sedan passing twice, but not the license plate. He filed a police report, added the photos to his binder, and quietly installed 6 more cameras. 3 days later, flyers appeared again. The headline read, "Keep Outsiders Out." The text alleged that absentee owners were exploiting loopholes and referenced slumlord interests threatening community safety. Garrett recognized the phrasing. It mirrored Brenda's language from prior meetings. None of it mentioned that he had lived in the neighborhood for 6 years. Tenants of his rental homes began receiving unexpected visits. One nurse reported being asked by Brenda whether her landlord's legal troubles made her uncomfortable. Another tenant, a school teacher, found a typed note suggesting the property might soon be foreclosed by the HOA. Fear, Garrett realized, had replaced simple irritation. In early January, Dell's wife came forward with an account that would later prove pivotal. She described Brenda visiting their home with an envelope containing cash, $2,000 offered if Dell withdrew from the election. He declined, and his wife documented the encounter in an affidavit. Consuela filed the sworn statement with both the association and county authorities as potential evidence of bribery. Brenda's tactics escalated online. A mass email to residents declared the recall postponed pending verification. Within hours, Patricia, the independent election monitor, replied to all, "The election will proceed on January 15th as scheduled. Please disregard misinformation." Her composure restored confidence that procedure at least would hold. Then came outside attention. A WCNC local news reporter contacted Garrett after receiving anonymous tips about the fake eviction and missing funds. On January 12th, the station aired a 4-minute segment titled, "Homeowners Question HOA Finances." The story showed photographs of the fraudulent notice, excerpts from bank statements, and interviews with residents. Brenda declined comment, citing ongoing legal matters. The piece spread rapidly across social media. Overnight, the neighborhood's internal conflict became public record. Some homeowners feared publicity might lower property values. Others felt relief that someone beyond the gates was finally watching. Garrett remained measured. He neither celebrated nor commented publicly. "Stay quiet," Consuela advised. "Let the process finish cleanly." As Election Day approached, the pink notices disappeared from doors, replaced by printed reminders of meeting time and quorum requirements. Beneath winter's thin sunlight, the subdivision's identical roofs and driveways seemed to hold their breath. In that calm before the vote, one fact stood out. A community long defined by silence had learned how to read its own rules, and that awareness, once acquired, would not return to sleep. The morning of January 15th broke clear and cold. Frost traced white lines across driveways as Garrett left for work at 7. At 4 that afternoon, a sheriff's deputy knocked on 349 Cypress Lane, the house Brenda rented from Summit Holdings. She answered the door, expecting a delivery, and instead received a civil summons for non-payment of rent. The deputy's tone remained professional. Acknowledgement, signature, copy served. Timing, though coincidental, carried symbolic weight. By evening, the clubhouse filled beyond capacity. 89 residents folding chairs borrowed from garages, the air warm with nervous expectation. Patricia, clipboard in hand, called the session to order at 7 sharp. Brenda sat at the front table, lips pressed tight, papers stacked before her. Patricia began. "Tonight's purpose is to conduct a recall election under Article 5, Section C of the bylaws. Ballots will be distributed, collected, and counted in open view." She emphasized neutrality. This was procedure, not performance. Before voting commenced, Brenda requested to speak. She accused Garrett of harassing leadership and claimed his rentals degraded property values. Garrett waited for silence, then replied evenly, "I own the home you live in, Ms. Coach. Here is your signed lease, showing 3 months unpaid rent and a clause prohibiting business use of the premises." The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda's attorney, seated nearby, whispered for her to remain silent. Ballots were passed row by row. Each homeowner signed beside their lot number. Patricia and 2 witnesses observed every step. Counting began at 8:30. The first totals formed a pattern too clear to misread. 71 votes for recall, 8 against, the remainder abstaining. Dell was elected president, Iris treasurer, Marcus secretary. Applause filled the space, not triumphant, but cathartic. When order returned, Patricia read the formal certification. "Effective immediately, the previous officers are removed, and newly elected officers shall assume their duties." The gavel struck once. Brenda stood, eyes wet but jaw set. "You people have no idea what you're doing," she said, and left without another word. The door's slow close echoed longer than her footsteps. After adjournment, residents lingered in the parking lot. The cold seemed softer than it had in months. Garrett handed Patricia a thank you note and packed away his binder, the same one that began with a single violation notice months earlier. As he drove home, headlights glinting on quiet streets, he saw porch lights flicker on like small acknowledgments. Governance had returned to those it was meant to serve. The following weeks brought resolution layered with fatigue. Brenda vacated 349 Cypress Lane under sheriff supervision on February 3rd. Inside, damage was moderate. Broken blinds, 2 cracked tiles, Scattered paperwork. Garrett's property manager photographed everything for the record. Unpaid rent and repairs totaled $5,800. The claim joined the growing list of civil matters trailing her. Meanwhile, the newly elected board began its audit. Phyllis Chen formalized her earlier analysis, comparing association ledgers against vendor statements. On February 28th, she presented her findings. $77,000 misappropriated between 2020 and 2023. $42,000 traced to inflated landscaping invoices, $15,000 to undocumented reimbursements, and $20,000 to personal debit transactions. The board referred the report to local law enforcement. The district attorney reviewed but declined criminal prosecution, citing limited resources and the complexity of HOA governance laws. Civil action, however, remained viable. Consuela filed on behalf of the association seeking restitution. Settlement negotiations followed. Kenneth Kowich, through counsel, agreed to repay $40,000 to avoid litigation. Brenda filed for Chapter 13 bankruptcy, listing the debt as disputed. Collection was unlikely, but symbolic accountability mattered more than recovery. The new board focused on reform. Dues decreased 15%, and expenditures were published monthly online. Enforcement policies were rewritten, clear photographic evidence, 30-day correction periods, and open appeal hearings. The tone of correspondence shifted from punitive to procedural. Garrett's tenants, once wary, noticed the difference. Letters addressed to resident stopped. Communication came politely, signed by Dell or Iris. Trust rebuilt slowly, like a muscle relearning use. In April, volunteers repainted the clubhouse and replaced fluorescent lights with warmer tones. The association voted to install benches along the walking trail. For the first time in years, the community fund showed surplus rather than deficit. Garrett closed his binder one final time, labeling it completed. The pages held everything: notices, receipts, legal filings, and emails. A chronological anatomy of an HOA's collapse and repair. What had begun as personal inconvenience had evolved into structural reform. The fake eviction, the fines, the meetings, all now footnotes to a broader truth. Transparency, once demanded, transforms everything it touches. Spring arrived quietly. Dogwoods bloomed, lawns greened without measurement, and conversation turned from conflict to plans. With recovered funds in hand, Dell proposed creating the Pinerest Community Fund, reserved for scholarships and assistance to elderly or struggling residents. The motion passed unanimously. Garrett contributed $10,000 personally, framing it as restitution to the neighborhood for months of unrest. The first grant aided Mrs. Hanley, a widow whose roof had leaked through winter. Repairs finished before Easter. In June, Iris launched a pollinator garden initiative on an unused half-lot near the pool. 30 volunteers brought soil, stone, and seedlings. Children planted milkweed, coneflower, and goldenrod. A small plaque read, "Community thrives where sunlight reaches." Media interest returned in midsummer. WCNC aired a follow-up segment titled, "The HOA That Fixed Itself." The story balanced caution and optimism, citing Pinerest Meadows as an example of reform through civic engagement. The piece later won a regional award for community journalism. Internally, the board adopted a new principle: open records by default. Minutes were emailed monthly. Every expenditure appeared on a public spreadsheet. Fines dropped 80% simply because communication improved. Garrett declined formal office but served as informal advisor. His quiet mantra, "Document no ally record calm persist," circulated on neighborhood bulletin boards. The 6 words distilled months of lessons into simple guidance. By autumn, The mood of the subdivision had changed fundamentally. Driveways displayed potted plants instead of pink notices. Neighbors greeted each other by name. Even discussions about bylaws carried humor instead of suspicion. On January 15th, exactly 1 year after the recall, the board hosted a dinner in the clubhouse. Tables lined with potluck dishes filled the air with warmth and relief. Garrett arrived last, carrying a tray of barbecue and a worn binder under his arm. When someone asked what he planned to do with it, he smiled. Keep it. A reminder that paper keeps promises honest. The documentary closes with a slow aerial shot of the neighborhood at dusk, orderly, lit by porch lights, quiet again. Over it, the narrator's final words. In Pinerest Meadows, authority once misused was reclaimed not through anger, but through record-keeping, persistence, and collective resolve. Every covenant, every signature, every dollar became proof that self-governance can survive when ordinary people choose to pay attention.